Okay, so we're happy to have Whitney Swink and H.T. Tseng from North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services with us today for the presentation as an update, an insect and disease update from their plant industry and plant division section. So H.T. will be presenting first, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Hi, y'all. Good morning. Thanks, Danny, for the introduction. And my name is H.T. Tseng, and I am the plant pathologist for Plant Industry Division. So today I'd just like to share some information about the major issues or major cases we had in 2020, and also just a short discussion, perhaps, about danger of invasive species. All right, so here's my outline. Of course, I'm going to talk about the danger of invasive pests and disease, and then some of the case studies that we experienced in 2020, specifically Rustonia and Southern Oak Deaths and tomato brown rugose virus. And also, we are continuing the boxwood blight compliance program in Plant Industry Division. So, invasive pests and diseases. According to USDA, invasive species constitute one of the most serious economic environmental threats of the 21st century. That's basically because all the international trade and interstate tradings, there's a lot of pathways for plant material and, unfortunately, disease or insects to move around the world. Total loss, according to USDA estimation, it's about 137 billion per year. And of course, as you know, invasive pests or diseases can destroy forests and reduce crop yield. And of course, it slows the trade routes. For example, if you see down here, that's emerald ash borer. It's an invasive insect. It destroyed a lot of ash trees in North Carolina already. Reduced crop yield, for example, Florida for years have been dealing with this disease called citrus greening. And slow trade route, for example, if you are in North Carolina and we have hemlock scale, if you want to ship that Christmas tree material to other places, you have to pass inspection, and some states have specific regulation towards this pest. And of course, that process will slow down trade routes. All right, so the major pathway for invasive pests and disease to move around, one example is weather events, but that is actually very rare. For example, I think early on in Florida when they had citrus canker issue, they still have it now, but when they first had citrus canker, it was a hurricane that blew most of the trees throughout Florida, and that's a rare weather event. And mostly is human activities that moves these pests around. For example, as I mentioned, international or interstate trading, movement of soil, firewood or container, etc. That's why if you move for example, strawberry plants to Florida, they specifically request that to be bare root. That is because any soil attached to it may harbor undesired microorganisms. And this is just spotted lanternfly on a rusted shovel with some egg mass. I'm sure Whitney will talk more about it, but that's one way this pest can move around. That's on container or tools. And I'm sure you'll see this kind of banner around state park or national park that emphasize the importance of burn local. Do not move firewood across state line or other counties, etc. So the goal of Plant Industry Division, one of our goals is to protect the state's agriculture and natural environment from introduced plant pests, insect disease, and obnoxious weeds. So to achieve these goals, we do various surveys, and also our specialists do quite a lot of inspection and licensing. And also we rely on reporting of for nursery growers, and also sometimes we will get a call from concerned citizens as well. But working closely with nursery growers and other agricultural producers is a very important way for us to learn about potential hazard and potential new disease or pest problems. So in 2020, Ralstonia solanacearum race 3 Boulevard 2 caused some problems in the US. Ralstonia is a soil-borne bacterium and it infects the vesicular system. So what it does is that this bacteria attacks the plant roots, move up to the plant tissue, into the plant tissue, and blocks water and nutrient transportation. As you know, that's what vesicular system does, and causes wilted symptom. I can find my mouse. This wilted symptom, and it's a systemic disease and actually cause the entire plant to be killed. It causes a lethal bacterial wilt. In 2020 April, USDA confirmed the detection of a single variety of geranium plant located in Michigan greenhouse. This is the first confirmed case of Ralstonia race 3 Boulevard 2 in the US greenhouse since 2004. So it's been over 10 years, 15 years or so that we had this problem, but in 2020, we found this disease again. I'm sure being in Eastern North Carolina, you've heard about Grenville wilts on tobacco. So in North Carolina, we actually have Ralstonia solanacearum, but it's a different race and viral. So race for the bacterial in the bacterial world emphasizes its host range. So in North Carolina, we have race 1, and that targets tobacco, tomato, and most of the solanaceous crops. And race 3, they are particularly worried about it because it can also attack potato. So race 3 and what we have, so we have race 1 here, and race 3, their host range overlaps some, and as shown here, race 3 Boulevard 2 derived from South America and is more cold tolerant and is more aggressive compared to what we have in North Carolina. So it's definitely a select agent that we don't want it to be in the US. So what happens when they find this disease? So the infected plants came from a propagation greenhouse in Guatemala. That's what Michigan found. So once USDA determined it is this pathogen, it immediately stopped shipments of geranium plants to the US upon confirmation. So as you can imagine, it takes time to collect sample and do the molecular diagnostic on this. And then during this period of time, there are already 288 greenhouses across 39 states that have received the geranium cutting from the Guatemala facility. Unfortunately for us, those greenhouses were mostly up in Northeast, and there were only 2 nurseries in North Carolina that received this material from the provider in Guatemala. So what NCDA did was we take immediate action according to USDA protocol. So we destroyed the reported variety immediately and then inspected all geranium varieties at the nursery. We were looking for symptomatic plants. This is a typical symptom of the Ralstonia causing bacterial wilts on geranium. So, and I understand that the lower leaf of the geranium often looks unhealthy, wilty, but if you look closely, there's this necrotic region along the vein, specifically on the lower part of the leaf, and as the disease progresses, it will become throughout the entire plant. So that's the typical symptom we may find on geranium. So we inspected all the geranium in the 2 nurseries and make sure there were no symptomatic plants. And then, of course, we requested shipping information. We wanted to know exactly how many geranium or plants they received from Guatemala and from this supplier, so that we could have a track record, right? So, and then after the inspection, we require the nursery to do a series of disinfection, including the greenhouse benches, or the floor, and also all the tools that may have came in contact with the geranium plants. So fortunately for us, after the initial destruction, we did not find any additional symptomatic plants. And then, of course, we want to make sure that this disease is not was not unnoticed throughout the season. So we conducted weekly inspection at the 2 nurseries. And fortunately, we did not find any symptomatic plants in North Carolina. So that's a good thing. So, we mentioned that this detection occurred in April, and USDA and various state agencies acted accordingly immediately. So on June 11th, APHIS and its state partners successfully completed the action to eliminate the pathogen from U.S. greenhouses. So it's safe to say that Ralstonia erythrivalva 2 can no longer be found in any greenhouse productions. So, but it's definitely something that we need to be aware of in the future. So, based on this experience, so what we learned about and to prevent further future contaminations. The first thing is that based on the passage biology, right? We mentioned that Ralstonia is a soil-borne bacterium, so it has a relatively limited capability to spread throughout your nursery. It mainly spreads by flat splash from overhead watering. So when you use overhead watering, this water particles may, once you touch your splash from your plant, like for example, this is what the infected plant may look like towards the base, the crown area. All these dark necrotic regions, they will ooze out bacteria. So if you use an overhead watering, water may touch this and splash to neighboring plants. So that's the main way it could spread in your greenhouse bench in your greenhouse. Also, the bacteria can contaminate your irrigation water. So if you recycle all the water you had used when during irrigation, this irrigation water may be contaminated with the bacteria and spread further in your greenhouse. So what can we do to prevent the spread of the bacteria? One thing I really like to emphasize on, like any other greenhouse diseases, sanitation is the key, right? So spacing is also very important, because I mentioned that the bacteria spreads through overhead watering or water. So spacing, if you have all your plants clustered together like this, it's easier for the bacteria to spread. And also it's just a general good practice to have some spacing, because if all your plants are so closely packed together, it limits airflow. And when you water them, it takes longer for the plants for the leaf surface to dry. That's basically a inducive environmental condition for not just the bacteria, but various other fungal pathogens as well. All right. And other things to keep in mind is to keep track of movement of plants. So for example, if you receive the plant material, like the cuttings, you wanna, when you do the pottings and laying out on your greenhouse benches, you wanna make sure that it is organized, so to speak. So make sure you know that where you have been using, which spaces or tools that you've been using to plant these plants. And clean your equipment with disinfectant after handling all the plant materials. And also, it is important to have a record of when you receive the plant material, and if you do large amount of shipment to other nurseries or nursery dealers, it is important to keep a record of it, so you know where the plant went and when and how you got the plant. Like, for example, with geranium cuttings, I know specifically that if you order 1,000 plants, they don't just come in one shipment, right? It may come in various boxes. It is, if it's possible, it is ideal to separate the plants based on the shipment, because when the plants are closely packed in that box, there's a high chance that not just Rustonia, but if there's any other pests or diseases, all the plants that have been commingled together, there's a chance that they all become contaminated. So you want to reduce that risk by having some spacing between either your cultivars, your varieties, or based on how you receive the plants. I know it can be hard to do sometimes, but it's a very good practice to have. So the second disease I'd like to talk about is southern oak death. It is a federally regulated disease. It's caused by the pathogen Phytophthora ramorum. So I'm sure in nursery industry, y'all are familiar with Phytophthora. There are various species that's native to North Carolina, like Phytophthora cinnamome, and on tobacco, there's Phytophthora nicotiana. But Phytophthora ramorum is a specific species that we don't have in North Carolina. And it causes a huge problem on oak trees and various ornamentals in California, Oregon, and Washington on the East Coast. On the West Coast, I'm sorry. So you may think that is a West Coast problem, but a lot of nursery bring in materials from Oregon specifically, and there are more than 75 plant species that can be either infected by the disease or be associated with it. And exactly how this pathogen can spread across the state. Okay, so the pathogen Phytophthora ramorum, it causes a leaf blight and shoot diebacks. It favors sort of cooler temperature. It favors like between 65 and 70 degrees. That's where it's optimum for the disease to spread. So what I mean by leaf blight or shoot dieback is what it looks like under here. You can see that this part of the plant have this typical, we call it shepherd, like a shepherd cane, right? And it's basically a rapid dieback that caused by the disease. The spores are shown here on the top right. This is actually the sporangia. What's inside of it, these oval structures are their zoospores that can spread easily through rainfall or overhead irrigation. So some of the major hosts include rhododendron, kalmia, pieris, camellia, and viburnum. And the list goes on, but these are the most common hosts that we will find in North Carolina. And I'm sure a lot of the nurseries bring in these genus, these plants to, we have a very favored condition for these plants. So there's also a huge chance that the pathogen may come in with these plants. So what do we do regarding the southern oak death? So every year, plant industry have a southern oak death survey. So we look at big box stores, that's your Lowe's, Home Depot, etc., and also all the certified nurseries. If you have rhododendron, kalmia, etc., we will pay extra attention to it and look for any symptomatic plants. So here's what the typical symptom looks like. They describe it as a water-soaked leaf spot. You see how the necrotic region goes along the vein and particularly on the edge of the plant. So sometimes you'll be confused as sunburn, but if you look closely, both on the front and back of the leaf, you can see these dark necrotic regions. And this is again the dieback symptom we mentioned, or the top part of plant sort of just shrivels and dies. All right, and this is what it looks like on kalmia. So during the 2020 survey, we did find one nursery that had Phytophthora ramorum. So this rhododendron was found in the nursery in Western North Carolina in June during the routine nursery inspection. So the infected plants were from Oregon. And I'd like to point out that this is a small nursery that just started, I think in January 2020, and then brought this plant from Oregon through mailing order. Well, they were planning to use this plant material as starting material. So they brought in like one variety for each rhododendron and one variety and one plant for each rhododendron. So it's a relatively small amount, but still they brought in this pathogen along with it. So we followed USDA protocol and destroyed all the plants that were within the 2-meter radius. So 2-meter radius, that's how we decide this 2-meter radius is based on the pathogen diverse by biology, right? So we mentioned that it spreads mainly through irrigation and overhead watering. So that 2-meter radius is crucial for a crucial distance for that splash dissemination. So everything within 2 meters were destroyed, and all the plants within 4-meter radius were held for 90 days for further inspection. That's just to make sure there was no latent infection that were overseen by us during the initial inspection. And also we mentioned that Phytophthora ramorum have a huge host range, but all host plants at the nursery were inspected for symptoms just to make sure that the pathogen did not spread to any plant that's already established in that nursery. And of course, we require them to sanitize the greenhouse floor and all the equipment that became associated with the shipment and all the plants. And also we tested some water samples from the nursery just to make sure that they did not spread into the irrigation water and and its surrounding environment. So fortunately, the nursery, we caught it early on, and the pathogen did not spread to any other plants or the natural environment. So nursery is currently free of Phytophthora ramorum. So one thing I'd like to emphasize is that if we catch it early, we have a high chance of eliminating the pathogen from your nursery. So I don't want to say not to panic about it, but it's not something that it's like, if you get the disease, we have a method to eliminate it from your property or the surrounding environment. So we strongly encourage that if you find anything symptomatic, or send the sample to us or the PDIC, Plant Disease Insect Clinic at NC State. We can help you get rid of this pathogen, and then so that we are no longer, I mean, USDA have very rigorous regulation on this pathogen. So we definitely don't want this pathogen in the state of North Carolina. So again, to prevent contamination, acquire plants from certified sources. I know with nowadays, a lot of people, not just nursery owners, but also homeowners, tend to order plants from through online venues. And sometimes, a lot of times, they are not aware like where the plant actually came from. So that definitely raised some concern from our end. And I'm sure being a certified nursery in North Carolina is a much better source for clean material, for clean planting material for people in North Carolina. So also, it is important to isolate and quarantine new buy-ins. So if you brought in plants from Oregon, I'm specifically emphasizing Oregon because we had quite a lot of issue with them. So whenever you brought in plants from other states, it is ideal to quarantine them, separate them from all your established plants, all right? And just to see if anything weird happened to them, okay? And also, it's important to know the symptoms. So know what you're looking for when we say something's out of the ordinary. So again, this is just a symptom on rhododendron branch. All right, This dark necrotic region is caused by the pathogen that causes dieback symptom. All right, and then also it is important to avoid irrigation water flowing through your quarantine plant. Right. So because a lot of pathogen, like we mentioned Ralstonia in the previous case, in this case, Phytophthora ramorum, they both travel with your irrigation water quite easily. So make sure when you quarantine something that it is not upstream of your irrigation water flow. And also it is important to sanitize your equipment. Okay. So we mentioned bacteria and Phytophthora, of course. Virus is also a problem for plants. So tomato brown fruit rugose virus is a newly identified virus that affects tomato and pepper. And here's what it looks like on. So this is what it looks like on peppers. Causes. Oh, sorry. So causing these speckles on your peppers, and on severe cases, it will cause these necrotic dieback on your either tomato or peppers. So this map shows the current distribution of this virus. So it's found in China, Mexico, and multiple countries in Europe. And again, this is what the symptom looks like on tomato leaves. You can see these necrotic yellowing or discoloring along the vein of the tomato leaves, and also the leaf becomes shriveled or curved. That is pretty typical of any viral infection on tomato plants. So you may see the leaves look weird, mosaic patterned, yellowing or curved. But you could say it's virus, but it definitely requires further lab testing to make sure that it is tomato brown fruit rugose virus, because a lot of viral infection cause similar symptoms. And again, this is what it looks like on fruits, tomato fruits, this brownish speckles on the surface. Okay, so this virus spreads particularly through mechanical transmissions. So all the handling you may do when you are processing your tomatoes, specifically in greenhouse conditions. And propagation materials, including seedlings, seeds, or cuttings, are considered a high-risk pathway for introducing this new virus. Again, it spreads by contact. So currently, we are putting a lot of emphasis on greenhouse production of tomato and peppers. Not just that your entire process that's in greenhouse, but sometimes in greenhouse you first you start the plant material. Even if you have a field grown operation, sometimes you start the material in greenhouse. That process is also a high risk pathway for this disease. So USDA actually issued a federal order in November 2019 stating that seeds and transplants from countries currently positive of the virus, that include Greece, Israel, Netherlands, Mexico, and China. So again, Mexico, China, and multiple European countries. All the seeds or transplant that come into the United States require them to travel with a phytosanitary certificate stating that the seeds are free of the virus. So I know even though if you grow tomato in your greenhouse, you may acquire the plant from a local source, it is a good idea to ask them where they originated from. So next thing I'd like to talk about is boxwood blights. If you grow boxwood in North Carolina, you likely know about it. So here is what a symptom looks like on leaves, but leaves fall off easily once the plant becomes infected. This rapid defoliation is a typical symptom of boxwood blight. So I typically lean towards looking at the stem, the empty stem, leafless stems with dark necrotic spots along the stems. Okay, so here are some good information about boxwood blight. There is a best management practices published by National Plant Board, and also a diagnostic guide from the American Phytopathological Society. Well, if you're interested in learning more about boxwood blight, those are two very good resources you could look up. And this map shows the current distribution of the boxwood blight pathogen worldwide. So again, Europe, some Middle Eastern countries, and then in the US, mainly on the East Coast, well, East Coast, West Coast, both have it, and some Canada, in regions in Canada. So again, if you are bringing in boxwood plants from other states, Oregon, and etc., it is important to isolate those plants before you, to make sure that the plant materials are clean and free of boxwood blight. So again, here are just some typical symptoms and more introduction about this disease. It's caused by a fungal pathogen, and it favors cool and wet conditions. So in North Carolina, there are actually two set time of the year, in late spring and also early fall. That's typically where we see a lot of boxwood blight in North Carolina. Our summer is just too hot for the disease, basically. I'm not saying you won't see it, but it's just less frequent. And symptoms usually start low in the canopy. So that's where the airflow is mostly limited. And whenever you water or rain happens, the foliage stay wet for a longer period of time at the lower part of the plant. And that's how the fungus, that's what the fungus needed to attack your plant. So sometimes leaf symptoms may be confused with chemical burn or winter damage, but again, the defoliation occurs quite rapidly. So what I typically look for is the brown, dark brown to black stem lesions on the lower part of the plant. And so that's a typical symptom of boxwood blight. So not only boxwood, but also, first of all, so there's no species or variety that is immune to this disease. There's some level of, some variety are less susceptible, but there's no variety that's completely immune. All right, and also sweetbox and Japanese Pachysandra, that's often used as ground cover plant, may also harbor this disease. So this is Japanese Pachysandra when it's infected with this disease, and the initial symptom looks like these yellow spots, and as time progresses, it becomes this brown circular leaf spots with a yellow haloing, and this is what it looks like on sweetbox. So current regulations. If you are interested in shipping plants to Tennessee or Pennsylvania, you are required to be part of our boxwood blight compliance program. And specifically, if you're shipping to Tennessee, you need to be under this compliance program and have each shipment inspected by our field representative, our regional specialists. And Pennsylvania requires you to be under compliance or have each shipment inspected. So this regulation not only applies to boxwood plants, but also Christmas wreaths or other greenery that contains boxwood. So regarding our boxwood compliance program, it is free, first of all, and is volunteer. So if you're interested in participating in this program, feel free to contact us. Some requirements for this compliance agreement is that you have to be currently free of boxwood blight in all your production areas. And of course, you need to train your staff to recognize the symptoms and also learn about the sanitation processes and the best management practices. This material we will provide you if you are interested in participating in our Box Reply compliance program, but I strongly encourage you all to look up the information as well. Some emphasis on this compliance program is that you need to notify us about the buy-ins. So, and keep a record of the dates, varieties, and numbers that you got in. And also you need to isolate the buy-ins for 30 days from all the other plants you may have in your nursery and without applying any fungicide to those quarantined plants. Of course, inspected plants, and you as a nursery owner will need to check your plants weekly, and we have forms and official formats for you to record that data. Basically say, oh, I inspected the plants on each week, and what was the date? Did you find any symptomatic plants? That's all. And it's important to keep a record of all, well, it is required to keep all the record of all the outgoing shipments. And you will need to, we will send you a self-assessment. Also, will include some useful information about this box root blight problem. And so that you're not just checking off some information off a paper, right? So again, this is a free program and volunteer participation. But if you are shipping to Tennessee, you are required to be under this compliance program. So with that, I like to turn over to Whitney. And then I'd also like to thank the regional pest specialist that helped us do a lot of the survey work and inspection. And here's my email contact information. If you have any further questions, feel free to email me. And also, yeah, that's all I have. And I'll turn over to Whitney.
Thank you, HT. All right, so I'm going to take it from there where HT was talking about diseases and transfer over to insects. So I'm going to hit on 5 insects of concern today: the emerald ash borer, the European gypsy moth, the box tree moth, imported fire ant, and of course spotted lanternfly. Not all of these are in North Carolina yet, and they're all at different stages of problems for our state, but all are ones that I think are worth knowing about and what we're doing here in North Carolina to protect you guys. So the first thing I want to talk about today is the National Plant Board website. I imagine most of you who have nurseries are familiar with this if you ship out of state, but if you don't know about it, this is a really good resource for knowing what regulations other states have in place. They basically, if you go to this website, and Danny is going to send out an email with a link to this website at the end of my presentation today, and a few handouts. But you'll go to nationalplantboard.org, and they have a tab called Laws and Regulations, which I've highlighted here. And you click on that, and it'll take you to a state summary page where every single state has a PDF that you can open up and scroll through. You can see contact information for people in the state if you need to ask direct questions. It'll list whatever specific regulations they might have pertaining to plant pests. And if you have a question that you don't see answered on here, you of course always are welcome to contact one of us at NCDA. You're either a regional plant pest specialist or us in the Raleigh office. One tool that we have created on our website to hopefully help people better understand what quarantines are in place in North Carolina is our plant pest quarantine tool. So again, I'm going to have Danny send a link out, and the link will take you directly to the next page I'm going to show. But you can also just go to our homepage, which is ncagr.gov/plant industry. And right here on the front, you'll see the section called Plant Pest Quarantines. And if you click on this link here, highlighted, you will get this page. At the bottom of this page is a big table that basically lists our pests with quarantines, insect pests, weeds, diseases by county, but also we have this great tool. So you'll see this and you have to basically read this, click I understand and okay. And then you'll come up with this map. And what this allows you to do is you can search anywhere in the state. You can either click directly on the map. So this example here, I just randomly clicked in the middle of Durham County, or you can type in an address. So for this purpose, I clicked here and you'll click this arrow. And what it shows you, you'll select Durham, is all the quarantines in North Carolina, and you can click on each one individually, and it'll tell you if that location you've clicked on is inside the quarantine. So for this, I click on fire ant, and it tells you that Durham County is quarantined for imported fire ant. And then we've also included a link to the relevant web page that has all the information you might need to know about how that quarantine works. So another example, let's say you click on gypsy moth instead. In this case, Durham County is not quarantined for gypsy moth. So as I said, you don't just have to click on the map. You can also type an address. You could type in a county. It's a really neat tool. But my one side note for this is our ArcGIS guy has just taken another job literally as of this month. And so any updates that might need to come to this, which I'll get into in a minute with Emerald Ash Borer, may not show immediately on this quarantine app. So if you do have questions and you're concerned that, well, what if something has changed, you can contact me directly and I'll have my contact information at the end of this. But in normal times, this would be updated all the time, regularly. This is just a weird random time where we are currently without our tech guy, but hopefully we'll have that position filled soon. So I want to first start by talking about Emerald Ash Borer. This is a pest I imagine most of you are familiar with by now, because unfortunately it is spreading throughout our state. So for those who've never heard of it before, Emerald Ash Borer is a beetle pest that is native to northeastern Asia. It was first detected in the United States and Michigan in 2002, and it's believed to have come in on wood pellet products. In North Carolina, it was first found here in Granville County in 2013. And sadly, as you can see with this map on the upper right corner, it is spreading throughout the entire state. 35 states in the country and multiple Canadian provinces have this pest, and it is killing hundreds of millions of ash trees in North America. Susceptible species are green ash, white ash, Carolina ash, pumpkin ash, and also worth noting, white fringe tree. So that could, affect potentially nursery if you're selling any of these species out of state to areas that don't have it. That might be something you need to look into more and just make sure you're meeting other states' regulations. In terms of identifying this insect, it is very striking. It's a gorgeous metallic green beetle, and when its wings are spread, it has this kind of classic purplish red appearance under its wings, although you'd be less likely to see that. It's small, so you can see here, smaller than the size of a penny. But the main thing that you would notice are the signs and symptoms on trees. So this is a classic. You might see crown dieback and all these epicormic shoots appearing along the trunk. The D-shaped exit hole is a very classic symptom. There are other bee-crested species that also will have this D-shaped exit hole, but in terms of the ones we're concerned about, Emerald Ash Borer is the real key thing here. And if you were to peel back the bark, you'd see these very classic serpentine galleries, and these are caused by the larvae that you see. You might also notice increased woodpecker activity and bark splitting from woodpeckers trying to get at the larvae. In North Carolina, adults of this pest are generally active April through June, but larvae can generally also be found year-round under the bark. So again, just peeling that bark back. But here's where things get a little tricky. As of January of this year, the feds have deregulated this pest. So the quarantine, which you can see in this map, noted by the blue line, that has gone away. And as a result, we will also be lifting our quarantine in North Carolina to follow suit. This has not happened yet, so we're kind of in this weird transition phase with Emerald Ash Borer. So this is why I wanted to highlight the National Plant Board site. Every state is handling how they regulate Emerald Ash Borer and wood-related products differently as a result of this, which is a bit frustrating. And so if you have questions and you just aren't sure, you can go to that site, or as I said, contact one of us, and we will do our best to research and make sure that anything that you are shipping to other states is meeting the other states' requirements. This is, as I said, very recent change, but unfortunately, this is one of those where eradication has long since sailed. This will not be a pest that is eradicated. So they've shifted to doing biocontrol and having individual states try to manage the populations as best as possible. But sadly, Emerald Ash Borer has become a very widespread problem. So moving on to kind of new pests, this is the box tree moth. And I will start by saying this pest is not known to occur in the United States yet. So very good news for us here in North Carolina. However, like many invasives, just because it's not here yet doesn't mean it'll get here never. This is native to Eastern Asia. It was first introduced into Germany in 2006 and has sadly spread throughout Europe. And a big part of that is because most boxwoods, or at least 2 species I know of, are native to Europe. And so there's boxwoods not just being sold or in homes, it's also in wild populations. So it spread pretty rapidly. It was first detected in North America in Toronto in 2018. And currently it's still only in that localized area, which is great news. In terms of identifying it, the adult moths are small. They're about 1 inch in size. In general, they will have this appearance of a brown kind of edges around the wings with mostly white. And you'll notice these little white spots here and here. About 25% or less will actually have pure brown wings, but they will always have these little white markings here, and that can differentiate them from other lookalike moths. Their caterpillar stage, they're bright green with a really shiny black head. They have black and white stripes with dots along, and they've got hairs. The first instar is very small, and they can reach about 2 inches in length. Now, the reason this pest is of high concern is it is the only known defoliator, insect defoliator of boxwoods in North America. And we have so many boxwood producers, both producers and also nurseries that just sell boxwoods that they get from other areas. And so this is one just to keep a lookout for. We are participating as of this year in a multi-state survey for this pest. And the good news is that this pest does have a known sex pheromone. And so trapping will actually be helpful for monitoring populations if they're there. You know, sex pheromones are really good for luring it into the trap and us, seeing it. But as I said, right now we have no reason to believe this is here. We just kind of are doing, early outreach just to make sure people are aware of it. So if you start to see signs of defoliation like you see in these images here, let us know, because as I said, this is the only known insect defoliator, and obviously boxwood can cause defoliation, but it'll look quite different. Excuse me, boxwood blight, as HT mentioned. Gypsy moth. So this is another one that I'm sure most of you have heard of before, even if you've never had to experience it. I always like to include this this animated image, animated map to kind of show the spread over time in the United States. So this one has actually been here a long time, since the 1800s, and it was intentionally / accidentally introduced. It was brought over by an amateur entomologist who wanted to try and crossbreed it with a native insect in order to produce a silkworm industry here in the United States. But unfortunately, a storm came through, knocked over his jars, and gypsy moth escaped, and here we are today. So gypsy moth is a tree defoliator. It feeds on the leaves of over 300 species of trees, mostly oaks. Oaks definitely its preference. But here in North Carolina, we are part of the Slow the Spread program and work really hard to kind of keep it out of our state, or at least fight back the insurgent populations each year. So in that bottom right graphic, you can see what the spread would look like with and without the Slow the Spread program. And something we're really proud of being a part of and hope to continue working with for some time to come. In terms of identifying gypsy moth, the really destructive stage are the caterpillars, and they're pretty striking. They've got 6 rows of pairs of red dots and 5 rows of paired blue dots. They do have urticating hairs, so if you were to encounter these, just be careful handling them. They're not too harmful, but it can be itchy, and if you were to say inhale too many, it can just kind of cause like an itchy throat. So just handle with caution. One way to separate them from some of the native pests that we deal with, like eastern tent caterpillar or forest tent caterpillar, they don't make webs or nets or webbing with silk. And so basically, gypsy moth, if you see webbing of any sort, you're not looking at gypsy moth. It's one of the other frustrating caterpillar stages. The adults are active usually May to June to July. The females are bright white and they cannot fly. And so they basically, once they become adults, will mate, lay eggs, and then die off. The males, however, can fly, and they're the ones that spread around. They're noteworthy. They're quite large. All of them will have this little kind of upside down V or chevron that points to a little dot, which I've highlighted here, and you can also see it on the female gypsy moths. It's a really good key feature you can look for. The female gypsy moths will have a filamentous antennae, but the males have these really bold, feathery antennae. And we trap across the state. We usually set between 17,000 and 20,000 traps annually. But the reason I note this for the nursery industry is because of the egg masses. This is the biggest concern for spread of gypsy moth. So here in North Carolina, we only have small populations and we do treat every year. But if you're bringing in material from northern states with known reproducing populations of gypsy moth, there's some regulations in place, but the main thing is you just want to make sure you look for egg masses when you bring stuff into your nursery or your area. The egg masses are about a quarter in size. They're kind of orange tannish and they're hairy. And they'll lay their eggs on anything. So not just trees, they'll lay their eggs on stone tile products, on vehicles, on equipment, what name you, they will lay their eggs on it. So this is just something to be aware of and be cautious of, because we do get little populations kind of throughout the state each year. And most of them are due to accidental introduction. Some are just natural spread, but most of them are, especially populations that can get out of control before we can kind of catch them, are because of egg masses that snuck in on material that, you know, just wasn't looked closely enough at. So I mentioned the human assisted movement. Here's more photos. You can see some of those egg masses on tires. Here's some under, you know, branch of a tree. But human assisted movement really is the main method for this pest spreading. And here in North Carolina, we do have one tiny section of the state that is under quarantine. That is in Currituck and one section of Dare County. There is a known population there, and unfortunately, the population is coming in from Virginia, which has a very heavy population just on the north, you know, this border right here on the other side. And this year, we will not be treating the population that has popped up here because unfortunately, Virginia is not treating. So there's really no point in us trying to treat if Virginia is not treating theirs, because insects don't care about state borders. That population is essentially the same one. But it's something we will keep an eye on. And thankfully that one population is isolated up in the quarantine right now. And the other populations that we're aware of, most of them, there's a few in Western North Carolina and one down in Buxton near Cape Hatteras. Those are all being treated this year. All right, moving on to the imported fire ant, yet another that I'm sure most of you are unfortunately familiar with, because this is a very widespread problem in North Carolina. Unlike most of our invasives, this one actually comes from South America, and it's believed to have been introduced in the United States in Mobile, Alabama, maybe between 1933 to 1945, though there's some people that actually think it may have come earlier, as early as 1918. And most people believe it came in on ship's cargo or ballast, and it has since spread through the southeastern United States all the way up into Virginia. And there is one population in California. 14 states have populations of imported fire ant. And unfortunately here in North Carolina, 77 of our 100 counties have, we've confirmed populations of this insect. In terms of identifying fire ants, you know, I kind of joke, the easy way to tell is if you poke a nest and they swarm out and try to immediately attack you, it's definitely fire ants. But in terms of true ID, one of the interesting characteristics is that fire ants don't have a uniform size. So you see in this graphic here, these are all workers, and you can see how varying their sizes are. And of course, the large queen. Fire ants will have a 10-segmented antennae, and I don't expect anyone to sit down and try and count those out because they're little. But you might notice that they do have a 2-node petiole, which is the section separating the thorax from the abdomen. And this is pretty striking here. Their mounds can be all sorts of different shapes and sizes, especially depending on the soil. But as I said, kind of your last ditch effort for knowing if it's fire ant is they are incredibly aggressive. In fact, one of the big problems is that they both bite and sting. And they spread so easily for so many reasons. They have a high rate of reproduction. They are competitively superior to other ant species. They're really good at dispersing. I always love to show this image because it's just alarming. This is after a flood. And this entire mat here are thousands upon thousands of workers that have basically formed a floating mat to save or sacrifice themselves to save the queen. And I think the queen is somewhere like right around here, but the point being, they are really good at survival, especially adapting to ecologically disturbed areas. So, you know, any place you've got, you know, new construction happening, you know, development communities, properties, Soil movement is a big way that they're getting spread, and mostly human-assisted movement. So I have 2 documents related to this insect that Danny will be sending out after. One of them is just a pest alert, just talking about fire ant, but one is about baled hay and how well fire ants can actually spread in baled hay and pine straw. These are just things that it's worth everyone knowing about, both to protect yourself, but to protect other people too. Baled hay and pine straw that has been resting on the ground is very susceptible to getting infested with fire ants. And so if you're going to sell or move baled hay or baled pine straw, you just don't want to move any of baled hay and pine straw that has been in contact with the ground. So anything that's been elevated either on top of other bales or on a hard pan surface, concrete, a pallet, what have you, those thankfully are able to be protected from fire ants. And then just in terms of other regulated articles, and again, if you're in the quarantine, I'm sure you're well familiar with this because you have to do these things in order to ship out of the quarantine. But soil separately with other things, plants with the roots with soil still attached, like balled and burlap plants, container plants, things like this, grass sod. But our specialists can absolutely help you make sure your nursery is able to ship material outside of the fire ant quarantine in a safe and effective way. In this image here, this is just the manual that we use, and this is available on our website just to kind of see what different treatment options there are and what rules you need to follow in order to carefully move your material. And then in terms of where it actually is, I keep saying it's all over the state. Here's our map. So every county in red is in the quarantine, and the counties in yellow are also in the quarantine, but they were just added this year, so effective January 1st, 2021. And unfortunately, I've confirmed fire ant in a number of these counties along this area: Stokes, Surrey, Wilkes, Caldwell. They're not high enough levels to be of heavy concern yet, but I'm definitely keeping an eye on it. We're also seeing some populations coming in, Swain, Haywood, Madison, because the Tennessee quarantine actually extends halfway into up to Madison County. And then the Virginia quarantine is all along the northern border to Rockingham County. So we're also keeping a pretty close eye on these counties up in the northern section of North Carolina that haven't been put in the quarantine yet. We are seeing populations. And I don't know if any of you experienced this last year, but I noticed a huge explosion in fire ant populations, especially in areas that we have been surveying for multiple years. I don't know if it was a perfect storm of weather, climate, what have you, but lots of insects had big population explosions last year. And I hope that maybe we see a little bit of a die off of that with this year, but that is yet to be seen. All right, so lastly, I want to talk about my big pest. And honestly, I could talk all day about this one insect alone. And if you take anything away from today, this is the pest I want you to be thinking about: spotted lanternfly. This is not yet found in North Carolina, but it is the one that everyone needs to be worried about. It is a plant hopper. It's a member of the family Fulgoridae, and it's one of the only pests known in this family. Again, like with many of our invasive insects, it is native to parts of Asia. It was first introduced in Korea in 2004, and it became a major pest of grapes and peaches. It was introduced in Japan, and of course, it's also been introduced, sadly, here in the United States. It was first detected in Pennsylvania in 2014, and since then, it has spread into Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Ohio, other parts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Virginia, and West Virginia. It's not here, as I said, but we're very worried. It's just a matter of time. One of the key reasons that this pest is alarming is it has a very broad host range, and some of the things that it feeds on are really important commodities for us in North Carolina. So to list some of the really highlighted ones: apples, birch, cherry, grapes. And I'm gonna say grapes and show you this alarming photo. They have destroyed entire vineyards in Pennsylvania. Now, this is not after 1 year. This does take a couple of years, but they've definitely been destructive on grapes. They feed on hops, lilac, maple, poplar, your stone fruits, walnut, willow. And I mentioned tree of heaven on this list. Most of you probably know tree of heaven is not a pest. It's also an invasive species, but the downside to tree of heaven, it is its favorite food. And the reason that is a problem is that tree of heaven, or Ailanthus altissima, is everywhere in North Carolina. Now, the good news, it's much less common in Eastern North Carolina. So there is a section of the state that maybe won't be hit as hard, but another host is Chinaberry, which is more prevalent in Eastern North Carolina. And Chinaberry is the only confirmed tree, and this is in China, where spotted lanternfly has been shown to complete its life cycle other than tree of heaven. A lot of research is going in to this pest to find out if tree of heaven really is required to complete the life cycle. We hope that it's just that, because maybe there's some management tools that can go in place, but considering tree of heaven is as widespread as it is, this pest is not one that we're going to be able to eradicate. It's about control and suppression and knocking back populations if and when we find them. In terms of the damage that they do, they're piercing, sucking insects, and they produce copious amounts of honeydew, which I cannot stress enough. So essentially, for lack of a better term, they poop sugar water. So what this causes is you'll get really, really bad sooty mold buildup. This happens on the understory growth, on the trees themselves, but this is also happening on people's homes and businesses because they get everywhere. Fungal mats will begin to form at the base of trees, as you can see here. And trying to not be too graphic, but if you are in one of these areas, so these are all photos from Pennsylvania, the smell is just grotesque. It's basically fermented sugar water and it's everywhere. And so just being outside, it takes some of the joy of nature away from you. You've got, sugar water raining down on your head, the smell, the insects are just everywhere. This photo here shows that honeydew buildup. This is the vinyl bed truck cover. This was in a maintenance facility in in Pennsylvania. And this individual made the mistake of parking his truck too close to an ailanthus, a tree of heaven tree line that was infested with spotted lanternfly. And as you can see here, these are just all this honeydew that has dropped all over his truck. So you can imagine just how gross and unpleasant this can be. Say you're trying to enjoy your deck on a beautiful sunny day in the summer, but you have one of these infestations in your yard. It's gonna be really hard to enjoy yourself. It's causing, damage to property values, and people are having a hard time selling their homes. They're getting on people's home gardens, their home vegetables. I've seen them on blueberries, on peppers, on basil. I've seen them on ornamental grasses outside of a Target. It's really unbelievable how bad this pest can get. And I like to show this video here. So you'll see in the center, all of that dropping, that's all that honeydew coming down. So if you imagine hundreds, if not thousands of these insects, and these are all adults you see, just dropping that at the same time, it can really, really do a lot of damage over time. A lot of money and manpower is being spent trying to combat this pest. In terms of the life cycle, I do want to note that the date ranges that you see here, these are based on Pennsylvania. And so it's very likely when it establishes here, if it establishes here in North Carolina, will actually be slightly ahead, maybe 30, maybe even 60 days earlier. So take all of these dates with that grain of salt. So we'll start with the egg phase. They do overwinter in the egg stage, and this is the stage that's the most problematic in terms of spread of the insect. Spotted lanternfly will lay their eggs on anything. And that photo that HT had at the start of his talk with the adult and the 2 egg masses on the shovel was a great example of this. I'm sure you could barely see those egg masses. They're highly camouflaged. They're small. They're about an inch in size, about a quarter. They are gray, kind of a smeared appearance. And if you remember the gypsy moth that has that bright orange, they're very similar size. And like gypsy moth, they will lay their eggs on anything. One of the key ways this pest is spreading is actually on trains. For some reason, are attracted to rusted material, rusted metal, and trains, of course, have a lot of that. And tree of heaven is also found along train tracks. And so they're basically hitching a ride on trains. And the Ohio infestation is actually directly connected to a train that came from New Jersey. So this is something we're keeping a very close eye on. These egg masses, as you can see, are very hard to see. These are, of course, a freshly laid one. This is a hatched one. And here's a picture of a spotted lanternfly egg mass directly on top of a gypsy moth egg mass to give you a size comparison. They're very similar. And you can see the female who's just laid this egg mass. In late spring, they will emerge into their nymphal stages. The first 3 stages are small. I wouldn't expect anyone to really notice them. They're kind of nondescript. They also look like a lot of other true bugs. They do hop. So if you tried to go grab one, it would hop away. This 4th instar is the one I would expect people to really notice. It's about 1/2 inch in size, so much larger. very beautiful, bright red with these white polka dots, and it's developing its wing buds. This is probably here in North Carolina, if and when they get here. I would expect maybe May to June, we would maybe start seeing this, maybe even mid to late June. And I should say every single one of these life stages, egg masses, the nymphal stages, and the adults are really good hitchhikers. So they're all capable of moving long distances through human-assisted movement. The adults, in most cases, you're going to see them like this with their wings held behind their back. They're pretty large. They're actually a little over an inch from nose tip to wing tip. Occasionally, you could maybe see them with their wings spread. They're very poor flyers, so you're not as likely to see this, but I include that just so you can kind of see that really bright red under wings. They have bright yellow abdomens. And as I said, I could talk all day about this. There's so much interesting biology and behavior with this insect. So if you want to know more, please reach out to me. And yeah, anyway, this is the one, these right here that you would expect to see. And all of our interceptions in North Carolina, which I'm going to get to in a second, have been dead adults. So this life stage. So where I talked a lot about where it is in the United States and whatnot. So I mentioned first detected in Pennsylvania in 2014. This county that I've put an orange star on is Berks County. That was the original detection. So you can see that it's kind of spread out from there. The way to read this map, sometimes there's confusion, is if a county is filled in with blue, it means that there is a known reproducing population of spotted lanternfly. If it has a red outline, it means that that population, that area has been put under quarantine. So you can see there's multiple areas with reproducing populations that have not been quarantined yet. New York, Connecticut, Ohio, parts of Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland. And then all of these purple dots that you see, those are what we call regulatory incidents. And in these cases, we actually have 4 here in North Carolina, which I'm going to talk about. Those are, say a homeowner reported something to us, or we received a picture, and we'll go and investigate. And thankfully, at least for North Carolina, I can state to this, all of them we have thoroughly investigated and have found only single dead adults or 2 dead adults, no evidence of a population. We're certain they were all hitchhikers, but it's alarming. I mean, you can see just how far this pest can spread from the actual known populations. In fact, not on this map because it would be too difficult to include. I know one has been found in California and it hitched a ride on a plane. So like that one, speaking of ours, our Mecklenburg County detection was reported to us by an airplane mechanic who found a single dead adult in the cargo hold of an airplane. We've consulted with the affected states, and all of the research is showing that spotted lanternfly are not able to survive an airplane ride, which is really good news. But I'm always fearful of what if one makes it, into the car or the passenger section of the airplane. Who knows? So we're keeping a very close eye on that situation. But we're very, very certain that was just a single dead adult incident. Our Eastern North Carolina detection, this actually happened very recently. This was December of 2020. This was found on Christmas trees. Some of you may have heard about this because we did do a big outreach boost after it happened to make sure people were aware, look at their trees. If they saw anything, please call us. Thankfully, we never got a call, which I hope is good news, but we do know that the trees, unfortunately, were purchased from Pennsylvania, from the quarantine area. They should not have been. We're not really sure how Pennsylvania, that producer, was able to do this, but that's beside the point. Pennsylvania needs to handle that. But there were 144 trees brought into North Carolina, and we can only account for the one that was reported to us. So we will be heavily surveying Onslow County and the surrounding areas just to make sure that there were no egg masses or anything that could have come in a population. I mean, that's how easy it is for a new population to appear. And our 2 Western North Carolina detections to give more ideas of the various ways this pest can spread. The Buncombe County one was reported to us by a business owner who found a dead adult on a wood pallet, and he had purchased supplies from Pennsylvania, and they did indeed ship from the Pennsylvania quarantine. And so the dead adult just happened to come in on that pallet. Again, we've surveyed that area, have no reason to believe that there were more insects. The final one is the one in Henderson County. This one was again reported to us by a person who was looking at model homes, like those prefabricated homes that you can walk into and see. and she found a dead adult on the floor of one of these homes. And so that's crazy to us because the homes get moved. We know the home came from somewhere else. We're 99% certain the home was built in another state. We're having a very hard time getting the company to nail down exactly where that home was built. And we can't figure out where that one came from. So that's the only one of our 4 that we're truly a little baffled. But again, we have surveyed the whole area. We have no reason to believe there were others, but that's a pathway I wouldn't have even considered. So just be ever vigilant, especially in your nurseries if you're bringing in material from other states. Even if you were driving, visiting for vacation these other states, check your vehicles, check your equipment, check anything for egg masses, any of those life stages before you come back. They are such a good hitchhikers. I mean, I've seen reports of the instar stages surviving, clinging to the outside of vehicles going over 60 miles an hour down an interstate. So just be ever vigilant about this one. I worry that this could be the year that we really do find an actual population. So far, so good in North Carolina. And the more we can spread the word and get people looking, the better. And that being said, if you think that you've seen one, please take a photo and email us at badbug@ncagr.gov. And when you take a photo, do your best to include a size reference, a quarter, a pin, anything like that, just so we can gauge, because some lookalikes are much smaller, and that'll help us narrow down, no, that's not. And I do not mind. I would much rather get 1,000 false reports than miss the real report. And these photos in the background, again, are really to stress how out of control these populations can get. So you see on this tree here, all of these are egg masses. And if you recall, each egg mass can contain 35 to 50 eggs. You can get an idea of just how quickly these populations get out of control. And this photo on the right is just alarming. This is a person's backyard. And I don't know about you guys, but if I walked out into my backyard and saw this on my tree, I would not be happy. So you can just imagine how out of control this can get. And we do not want this affecting our nurseries, our landscape, anything in North Carolina. We do not want this to establish here. And with my last little teeny bit of time, I will say we do have a plan in place in North Carolina for combating it if a population is found. We have a team that's already been trained and in place. We have the chemicals that are needed, the herbicide and pesticide to, the herbicide would be for controlling tree of heaven itself. The pesticide, of course, would be for controlling the insect, but we have a plan and we hope it will be effective, but I also hope it's a long time till we actually have to put it in place. And my last thing is, for any insect or any regulatory question, please contact your local plant pest specialist. You can find their contact information at the website here, and you can look up your region. And then if you have just insect or disease diagnostic questions, the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic with NC State is wonderful and a great resource if you're not aware of them. They can be emailed. Their website has really great steps on how to submit things. I encourage you to make use of both avenues. And with that, if there's any time left, I will happily take any questions. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Whitney and HT for your presentations. I'm going to let Amanda Taylor, my counterpart from the West, handle any questions in the chat. I think there was one for HT, which I believe he replied to, but Amanda, I'll let you handle that in just a second. I do have 2 people that are logged in and unaccounted for. I have one as Josh iPhone. There are several Joshes on, so I want to make sure I get the right person confirmed for attendance. And then I have one person as a bunch of letters and numbers, U4ARAED, and it continues on. It's the only one that has a string of numbers. So if you can put your name in the chat so I can make sure you're recorded for attendance, that would be fantastic. I'll turn it over to Amanda, and I will put the link for today's pesticide credit license submission in the chat in just a minute.
Quickly, before we do questions, Whitney, can you turn off the sharing, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
All right, if you have any questions, you can unmute your mic and ask it, or if you want to type in the chat box, go ahead and type in your question. We have a question from Ann Mills. Are there effective traps available for helping detect the presence of spotted lanternfly? Whitney?
That is a great question. So there are technically traps. They're called circle traps. I didn't include a photo in this presentation, but they basically look like a piece of screen cut into a tent shape that's stapled to a tree, and then there's like a bag or a container put at the top. We have purchased some and will be setting some this year. But the downside to these is that there's no sex pheromone that's been identified for spotted lanternfly yet. And so we're using a chemical called methyl salicylate, which I think is a byproduct of tree of heaven. So it's just an attractant. But if any of you are familiar with any of our other traps, gypsy moth, for example, or sweet potato weevil, those have an isolated sex pheromone. So they're really good at attracting the insect because the insect thinks it's a female they're going to go mate with. That's not the case with spotted lanternfly. So the traps really only work if they're put on trees or very close to trees that already have populations. They're more for monitoring than they are for detection. As I said, we will be setting some. We're specifically going to focus on corridors into North Carolina. So we're going to be setting them at rest areas and a few other key places. And as we continue to develop this program, we'll expand our areas that we trap at this time. But great question.
All right, thanks, Whitney. Any other questions? There's a question from Duncan Malloy. Is it recommended not to take action to control a potential lanternfly if found until your agency is contacted?
Yeah, that's a really good one. So my preference would be to say yes, in part because we are prepared to use the resources, the time and resources to take care of it for you. My first thing would be, if you think you really have found one, absolutely take a photo and save a specimen. If you're able to collect one, please actually save the insect itself, because in addition to this being a pest that is just of high concern, they are actually trying to map the populations on a molecular scale to see if there's unique introductions. Right now, it seems to be all based on the original introduction. In terms of treating yourself, if it's like really out of control and there might be a slight delay, I guess absolutely you can do something to try and knock back the population, but we are very much prepared to go in and help you. And that could change over time if this becomes a pest that is truly establishing and things change. But right now, I would say call us and let us come and help you as the first step for sure.
All right, Whitney, we have a question. Could you clarify the fire ant map that you put up? So to be clear, in 2021, Burke is currently under the
yes. So Burke was a
expand in 2022.
So right now, nothing is changing in 2022. It could change. But yes, as of January of this year, Burke went from a partial to a full quarantine. Alamance and Guilford went from partial to full quarantines, and then we added McDowell and Jackson counties to the quarantine. So they were not at all in the quarantine, and now the entire counties are under quarantine. And so all of the nurseries in those areas they were contacted last year to basically let them know this was happening and what steps they needed to take. So as far as I know, every nursery that would be affected by this has already been contacted by us, and a plant pest specialist has met with them to talk about the regulations and what shipping out of the quarantine would mean for them. But right now we're in the process of deciding what we'll recommend for the 2022 expansion, and no decisions have been made yet. But if I had to guess, it's probably going to be a couple of those counties on the Virginia border. I don't have the map in front of me, but I think like Caswell and Person are two that I'm very concerned about right now with the amount of fire ants we're seeing up there.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, last call for questions. Type into the chat box or you can unmute your mic.
I just wanted to mention that a couple of our agents had said that they've seen these in Henderson County and Davie County, and I was just wondering, were you guys talking about spotted lanternfly or different pests? Just wanted to clarify that, if they could put that in the chat or come off mute, because that would probably be something Whitney would like to know.
It was about fire ants.
Okay, great, thank you.
Rebecca Armstrong says her family's from Eastern Pennsylvania and they've seen spotted lanternfly and they're everywhere. Reading, Pennsylvania has had yellow glue traps around the trees. And she's asking, is that normal for control?
Great question. So those are the tree bands. So a lot of those get used in North Carolina for like cankerworm, for example. The reason that people are moving away from that, they're probably good for your house. If you have a tree that you're worried is getting infested and you want to catch them, yes. The downside of them is that they catch a lot of bycatch. So in addition to other insects, sometimes beneficials, they're also catching lizards and birds and snakes. And they get filled up when an infestation is really bad, they get filled up within days. And so you have to change them out regularly, which can be problematic. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very cheap method, and it's certainly something that a homeowner or a nursery is welcome to use. I mean, it's just tanglefoot basically on a piece of paper wrapped around a tree. Kind of a funny story, I appreciate that you say you're from Eastern Pennsylvania or your family is. Just to give an idea of how out of control this is and how much this is stressing people out. People are calling 911 to report this in Pennsylvania. I've never known of an insect, maybe fire ant if it's a sting or a bee sting, like someone's actually having a health concern, but people are it's everywhere. It really, I mean, I didn't include it in this video, but I have a great video of them going into Target. There's just, you can't escape them up there. And everywhere you want to be, the spotted lanternfly are also going to be there. And so, like, there have been a few police departments that have actually had to tweet out, please stop calling 911 to report this. Like, we know you're upset. We know it's bad, but like, we can't, this is not a real emergency. Like, don't call us. And so, I know I'm sounding dramatic, but I just want people to understand this is not one to sit on. If you think you've seen it, by all means, let someone know, let us know, because we really want to protect North Carolina. And I guess one final thing I'll say about this is one of the issues that I think other states have had that we're really hoping we prevent happening here is that there was confusion initially whether the feds were going to come in or whether the states had to handle this. And waiting on that federal funding, waiting on the decisions was slow. And so these populations had time to get out of control. Well, we know, like, it's not worth waiting. And so, as I said, we've already purchased herbicide, we've already purchased pesticide, we've, got teams trained. Our goal is to not wait on anyone. That if this gets here, we want to just tackle it right away and not let there be time passing before we figure out what to do about it. So I'm hopeful that we'll have more success here in North Carolina with everything we know, but it's hard to say for sure.
All right, we have just a comment from Kevin LePage that there's he has a property in Mooresville with lots of fire ants. And then a question in regards to the fire ant quarantine. Are you aware of how far Virginia has extended their quarantine this year?
So I have not heard about Virginia expanding it. If they are expanding it, it's in the works. The only most recent expansion, I believe, was 2018, and that was adding, I think, 3 counties along the North Carolina border. And they're the ones that I was pointing out I think they maybe stop around Granville or one county west of that, but they have their specialists in their state have let me know that they are seeing a lot of fire ants north of Rockingham County. And I don't believe that section of Virginia is under quarantine yet, but it's possible that it's going into effect this year. I just haven't heard of that yet.
All right, great. That wraps up all the questions. Stacy says Pennsylvania is going to have a fun summer with spotted lanternfly and cicadas.
That's the truth. Oh, yes, the final question. So one of the things Danny is going to be sending out is we've developed a spotted lanternfly pest alert, and he'll be sending that to everyone. It's also on our website. You're welcome to share that far and wide. I've also attached a box tree moth pest alert, our fire ant pest alert, and then of course the fire ant, baled hay, and baled pine straw regulations. But if you have further questions, by all means, feel free to contact me. My email and phone number on our website. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Whitney.